The human equation. The Galactic Conclave had existed for over 12,000 years. In that expanse of time, hundreds of species had joined its ranks, bringing with them diverse technologies, philosophies, and approaches to warfare. The Conclave had seen it all, or so they believed until humanity emerged from their corner of the Orion Arm. Admiral Kella Tuvash stood at the observation deck of the Conclave diplomatic vessel Eternal Harmony, watching as the human battleship Thermopylae moved through space with an almost predatory grace. The ship was smaller than most Conclave capital vessels, yet there was something about it that made her scales tighten along her spine. "They're like nothing we've encountered before," said diplomatic envoy Niren beside her, his 6 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of anxiety among the Alphori. "Indeed," Kella replied, mandibles clicking softly. "They approach warfare as though it were mathematics, pure efficiency. Unlike other species that had evolved through predictable patterns of technological development, humans had taken a fundamentally different path. Their relatively brief but intensely violent planetary history had forged a species that approached conflict not as a necessary evil, but as a science to be mastered. The Thermopylae was just one of many human vessels that had begun to integrate with Conclave defense forces over the past decade. What made it remarkable wasn't its size or even its weaponry. It was the neural interface system that connected its crew directly to the ship itself, creating a terrifying synergy of human intuition and machine precision. Commander Jackson Mercer stood on the bridge of the Thermopylae, feeling the subtle hum of the neural links that connected him and his crew to every system on the ship. To an outsider, it might appear as though the bridge crew barely moved. They sat in their adaptive cradles, eyes closed, occasionally twitching a finger or whispering a command. But inside the Nexus, as the humans called their neural combat interface, they were everywhere at once. Conclave observers still watching? Jackson asked, his voice carrying the slight echo common to those speaking both aloud and through the Nexus. Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen nodded, her eyes still closed as she monitored the ship's defensive systems through her neural connection. "They haven't taken their sensors off us since we entered the system. I think we make them nervous." "Good," replied Tactical Officer Rice Okafor with a small smile. "They should be nervous. The Drakari wouldn't be, and that's why the Conclave keeps losing ships to their raids." The Drakari Collective had emerged as a significant threat to Conclave space over the past 30 years. A species evolved from pack hunters, they rejected the Conclave's diplomatic overtures and instead preyed on shipping lanes and outlying colonies. Their hit-and-run tactics had proven devastatingly effective against the methodical Conclave response protocols. Until humanity arrived. The first major engagement between human warships and the Drakari occurred in the Vega Proxima system. The Drakari had deployed their typical overwhelming force, 37 warships against what they believed was a vulnerable human colony. What they found instead were 5 human battleships, including the Thermopylae, waiting in ambush. The battle lasted exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. The human ships moved with impossible coordination, their Nexus combat systems allowing them to make tactical decisions and adjustments in microseconds rather than minutes. Weapons fired with precision that bordered on prescience, and defensive systems adapted to Drakari attack patterns almost instantaneously. When it was over, 34 Drakari vessels had been destroyed. The remaining 3 fled, heavily damaged. The human ships reported minimal damage and no casualties. Recordings of the battle spread throughout Conclave space, generating equal parts awe and terror. Here was a species that had transformed warfare from an exchange of force into something approaching an art form. Precise, efficient, and utterly lethal. The Drakari haven't been seen in Conclave space for 3 months now, Admiral Tivosh remarked as she continued to observe the Thermopylae. One engagement, and they'd gone silent. "Is that not the outcome we desired?" asked Niren. "Of course," Kella replied. "But at what cost? The humans don't just win battles, they annihilate their opponents. There's something disturbing about their approach. Their ships are individually more powerful than anything in our fleet, said High Counselor Vextra during the emergency conclave session. The amphibious Mordelian skin had turned a deep blue, a sign of profound concern. Their neural interface technology allows reaction times that are simply not possible for any other species. And yet they've been nothing but helpful, countered Representative Silith of the Tyrellian Confederation. The Drakari have been a plague on our shipping lanes for decades, and the humans eliminated the threat in a single engagement. At what cost? Asked Vextra, echoing Admiral Tivash's earlier sentiment. Their approach to warfare is fundamentally different from the rest of the conclave. Where we seek to minimize casualties and force surrender, they maximize efficiency regardless of the cost in lives. They're predators, said Elder Keelan of the Joric Imperium, his ancient voice carrying easily through the chamber despite its softness. Not in the sense of the Drakari, who hunt for pleasure and dominance. The humans hunt like the cold mathematics of evolution itself, with perfect efficiency and without malice. That makes them far more dangerous. The debate raged for weeks as reports continued to come in about human warship capabilities. Their neural interfaces were far beyond anything conclave scientists had conceived, not merely allowing for improved reaction times, but fundamentally changing how humans experienced combat. Inside the Nexus, a human crew became a single entity, a collective intelligence with the tactical acumen of trained warriors and the processing speed of quantum computers. They could perceive patterns in enemy movements before they fully formed, predict responses with uncanny accuracy, and adapt strategies faster than any opponent could react. "We've done nothing wrong," United Earth Ambassador Rebecca Chen insisted during her address to the conclave. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension in the chamber. "We've defended conclave worlds, protected shipping lanes, and honored every treaty obligation. No one is questioning humanity's intentions, Ambassador," said High Counselor Vextra. "It is your methods that concern us. Your ships don't merely defeat enemies, they slaughter them." The Drakari showed no interest in surrender, Ambassador Chen replied evenly. "They had rejected 17 separate peace overtures from the conclave before we engaged them. Sometimes, decisive force is necessary to prevent greater loss of life. There is decisive, and then there is your Nexus combat system," said Elder Keelan, "a technology that removes the natural limitations of reaction time and decision-making that all other species must contend with in combat. It creates an imbalance that threatens the very fabric of interstellar relations." The final ruling came 3 months after the Vega Proxima engagement. By a narrow margin, the Galactic Conclave declared human neural combat systems a potential threat to galactic stability. Human warships would be banned from participating in sanctioned conclave military operations, and the proliferation of Nexus combat technology to other species was expressly forbidden. Humanity did not take the ruling well. "They fear what they don't understand," Captain Alina Rodriguez said as she stood in the war room of the UES Defiance. Around her, holographic displays showed the distribution of Earth's fleet as ships were recalled from conclave space. "Can you blame them?" asked Admiral Thomas Nguyen. "We showed up and changed the paradigm of space warfare overnight. Of course they're terrified. So they'd rather face the Drakari with inferior ships and tactics." Elena shook her head. "Pride will get them killed." "Not pride," Thomas corrected her. "Cultural inertia. The conclave has approached warfare the same way for millennia. They see our methods as excessive, effective," Elena countered. "The word they're looking for is effective." As human ships withdrew from conclave space, diplomatic tensions continued to rise. Some human colonies at the edges of conclave territory found themselves increasingly isolated, their supply lines restricted under various bureaucratic pretexts. Meanwhile, reports began to surface of renewed Drakari activity in sectors once protected by human patrols. Humanity responded by accelerating military research and development. If they would not be allowed to protect conclave worlds, they would ensure their own colonies were impregnable. The Nexus combat system evolved into its second generation, with neural links becoming more sophisticated and ships more deadly. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something was stirring, something that would soon make the Conclave's fears of human military prowess seem quaint by comparison. When stars fall silent, they came without warning. The first indication that something was wrong was when the Conclave outpost in the Arcturus sector went silent. Communications simply ceased mid-transmission. The Conclave, accustomed to occasional technical difficulties, dispatched a standard investigation team. They never returned. 3 days later, the Gliese 581 colony, home to over 12 million Althori, sent a fragmented distress call that cut off after 11 seconds. The message contained only 3 words: "They are here." This time, the Conclave dispatched a battle group, 6 capital ships and their escorts, representing the finest military technology of 3 different species. Their final transmission included sensor readings of vessels unlike any encountered before, massive, asymmetrical constructs that appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it. And then, silence. Within 2 weeks, 17 star systems had gone dark. The pattern of advance was clear. Whatever this new force was, it was methodically cutting its way through Conclave space toward the core worlds. "They call themselves the Void Heralds," announced High Counselor Vextret to the emergency session of the Conclave. The chamber, normally orderly and procedural, had devolved into barely contained panic. The few survivors we've managed to evacuate report that they communicate only once before attacking. Their message is always the same: "Your light offends the void. It will be extinguished." "What do they want?" demanded Representative Silith, his usually immaculate appearance now disheveled from days without rest. "Extinction," replied Admiral Tivosh, who had been coordinating the increasingly desperate Conclave defense efforts. "They're not interested in resources, territory, or subjugation. They destroy everything in their path: ships, stations, colonies. They leave nothing but debris and silence." "Our forces?" asked Elder Kilan, his ancient voice steady despite the crisis. Admiral Tivosh's mandibles clicked in distress. "Ineffective. The Void Herald ships employ some form of energy-absorbing technology. Our conventional weapons barely register on their defenses. They simply absorb the energy and continue advancing." "And their weapons?" pressed Kilan. "Unlike anything we've seen," Tivosh replied. "They don't merely destroy our ships. They unmake them. Molecular bonds simply fail. Matter comes apart at a fundamental level." The silence that followed was profound. The Conclave, for all its millennia of accumulated knowledge and technology, found itself facing an existential threat it could neither understand nor counter. It was Elder Kilan who finally spoke the words no one wanted to say. "We need the humans." The transmission reached Earth's Central Command 17 hours later. By then, the situation had deteriorated further. 3 more systems had fallen, including a major Conclave fleet anchorage. The Void Heralds were now less than 30 light-years from Concordia, the Conclave capital world. "They're desperate," said Admiral Nguyen as the United Earth Defense Council reviewed the Conclave's plea for assistance. "After spending the last year treating us like dangerous children, now they want our help." "Desperation doesn't begin to cover it," replied General Sophia Patel, studying the tactical displays showing the Void Herald's inexorable advance. "Whatever these Void Heralds are, they're cutting through Conclave defenses like they're not even there." "The question is," said Council President O'Keefe, "do we help them?" The room fell silent. The diplomatic and military ramifications were complex. The Conclave had insulted humanity, restricted their movements, and hindered their colonies. Some on the Council argued that this was a perfect opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of excluding humanity from galactic security operations. "With respect, Madam President," said Commander Jackson Mercer, who had been called to provide tactical analysis, "that's the wrong question." President O'Keefe raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten us, Commander." "The question isn't whether we help the Conclave," Jackson said, highlighting the projection of the Void Herald's advance pattern. "It's whether we can afford to let these Void Heralds continue their advance. Their trajectory and methodology suggest a force that won't stop with Conclave space. If they're truly bent on extinguishing light, as they put it, they'll eventually reach human space too. Better to fight them there than here," General Patel agreed. "Not just that," Jackson continued. "This is the exact scenario our ships and the Nexus combat system were designed for, a technologically superior force that conventional tactics can't counter. We need to study them in action, learn their patterns, find their weaknesses, and we need to do it before they've consumed enough resources to become truly unstoppable." President O'Keefe nodded slowly. "What do you propose, Commander?" "Operation Firebreak," Jackson replied without hesitation. "Full deployment of the 3rd and 5th Fleets with Nexus combat systems at maximum capacity. We engage the Void Heralds at Torvis Prime. It's a natural bottleneck in their approach to Concordia. And the system's radiation profile will provide our neural networks with additional data processing capacity." The President studied him for a long moment before turning to the rest of the Council. "Opinions?" "The Conclave banned our ships," said Admiral Nguyen. "Deploying them now risks political blowback even if we succeed. If we fail," General Patel countered, "politics won't matter much." The vote was unanimous. Operation Firebreak was approved, and humanity would once again wade into battle. This time, against an enemy that threatened not just humanity or the Conclave, but all life in the galaxy. The human response arrived at Conclave headquarters exactly 6 hours after the initial plea. "Fleets mobilizing. Hold position. First contact in 72 hours." Elder Kalan nodded as he read the message. "Terse, efficient, very human. Will they be in time?" asked Representative Silith, anxiety evident in his voice. "They'll arrive at Torvis Prime approximately 12 hours before the Void Heralds, based on current projections," Admiral Tavash replied. "Barely enough time to establish defensive positions." "And if they fail?" High Counselor Vextra asked the question no one wanted to contemplate. Elder Kalan's ancient eyes seemed to look beyond the chamber walls to some distant vision. "Then we face extinction with dignity. But I do not believe they will fail." "How can you be so confident?" demanded Vextra. "Even our most advanced ships lasted only minutes against the Heralds." "Because," said Kalan, "the humans fight like nothing else in this galaxy. We feared their efficiency. Now we must hope it is as terrible as we imagined." Commander Jackson Mercer stood on the bridge of the Thermopylae, now the flagship of the hastily assembled Task Force Aegis. Around him, the neural cradles were filled with his crew, their eyes closed as they immersed themselves in the Nexus combat system. The ship hummed with power as the next-generation neural interfaces synchronized with the enhanced quantum processors. "All ships reporting ready, Commander," said Lieutenant Commander Chen, her voice carrying that distinctive Nexus echo. Task Force fully synchronized. The human fleet had positioned itself in a complex three-dimensional formation throughout the Torvis system. Unlike traditional fleet formations that prioritized overlapping fields of fire, the human vessels were arranged in what appeared to be a scattered, almost random pattern. But within the Nexus, there was nothing random about it. Each ship's position had been calculated to exploit the unique gravitational and radiation characteristics of the Torvis system, enhancing their sensors and weapons while creating blind spots and interference zones that would confound enemy targeting systems. "Void Herald fleet detected," announced Tactical Officer Okafor. "Emergence from FTL in 3, 2, 1. Space itself seemed to darken as the Void Herald ships appeared. They were even more nightmarish than the Conclave reports had suggested. Vast constructs of some unknown black material that seemed to devour light rather than reflect it. They moved with an alien grace that defied their size, spreading out into a formation that had overwhelmed every Conclave defense it had encountered. "Analysis," Jackson commanded, feeling the Nexus accelerate his thoughts as the ship's sensors fed data directly into his consciousness. Unusual energy signatures, reported Science Officer Dr. Amara King. Her consciousness partially merged with the ship's sensor array. They're absorbing electromagnetic radiation across the spectrum. Thermal, visible light, even hard radiation. It's all being converted into some form of energy that powers their systems. That's why Conclave weapons were ineffective, Maya Chen realized. Energy weapons would just make them stronger. Kinetic weapons? Asked Jackson. They generate localized gravitational distortions, Rice reported. Projectiles are either diverted or slowed to negligible velocities before impact. Jackson processed this information through the Nexus, feeling rather than seeing the tactical implications unfold. They absorb energy and deflect matter. Perfect defense. Nothing's perfect, Dr. King countered. Their absorption has limits. The energy conversion isn't instantaneous. There's a fractional delay. Jackson smiled. That's our window. Task Force, update tactical parameters. Synchronize weapons fire to exceed absorption threshold. Calculate gravitational compensation for kinetic weapons. Throughout the human fleet, the Nexus combat system disseminated these insights instantly. Ships began to adjust their positions, weapon systems recalibrated, and combat AIs generated new attack patterns. They're broadcasting, Maya reported. Same message as before. Your light offends the void. It will be extinguished. Let's show them how brightly we can burn, Jackson replied. All ships, execute attack pattern Prometheus. What followed defied conventional description. To an outside observer, it might have appeared chaotic. Human ships firing seemingly at random, changing positions unpredictably, some even appearing to retreat. But within the Nexus, it was a symphony of coordinated violence. The human ships fired their energy weapons in precisely timed pulses, calibrated to overwhelm the Herald's absorption capacity in microsecond windows of vulnerability. Kinetic projectiles were launched with exact calculations to exploit momentary weaknesses in the gravitational defenses. The Void Heralds, accustomed to enemies that fought conventionally, found themselves facing an opponent that adapted faster than they could respond. Every time they adjusted their defenses, the human attack pattern would shift, targeting new weaknesses before the old ones could be reinforced. It's working, Rice reported, his voice betraying rare emotion, despite the Nexus interface. Their absorption systems are overloading. Indeed, the black hulls of the Void Herald ships had begun to shimmer with unreleased energy, unable to process the precisely calibrated barrage from the human fleet. Press the advantage, Jackson ordered. All ships, execute killing stroke. In perfect synchronization, the human fleet's weapons converged on the destabilized Void Herald vessels. Energy weapons overloaded their absorption systems while kinetic projectiles, no longer deflected by gravitational fields, tore through their hulls. One by one, the seemingly invincible ships of the Void Heralds began to break apart. Some imploded as their internal systems catastrophically failed, while others erupted in brilliant explosions as accumulated energy was released all at once. But the victory was not without cost. Several human ships had been lost, caught by the Herald's matter-unmaking weapons, or destroyed when damaged Herald ships exploded with unexpected force. Status report, Jackson demanded as the last of the Herald ships disintegrated. 17 ships lost, Maya reported somberly. 23 heavily damaged, but the enemy fleet has been eliminated. Jackson closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those losses despite the victory. Begin recovery operations. I want every piece of Herald technology we can salvage, and prepare a full report for the Conclave. The news of humanity's victory at Torvus Prime spread through Conclave space with the speed of light. After weeks of unrelenting defeat and retreat, the seemingly unstoppable Void Heralds had been not merely defeated but annihilated. The human neural combat systems allow them to identify weaknesses in Herald defenses that our conventional approaches could not detect. Admiral Tivash explained to the assembled Conclave representatives. Their ships acted with a level of coordination that overwhelmed the Herald's adaptive capabilities. And the cost? Asked High Counselor Vextra. Significant, T-Vosh admitted. The humans lost 17 ships and over 2,000 personnel. But compared to our losses, the implication hung in the air. Conclave forces had lost hundreds of ships and millions of lives trying to slow the Herald's advance, with nothing to show for it but delay. The data the humans recovered suggests that the Heralds were merely an advance force, T-Vosh continued. An exploratory fleet testing our defenses before the main invasion. A murmur of alarm spread through the chamber. When will they return? Demanded Representative Silith. Unknown, T-Vosh replied. But the humans believe we have time to prepare. Years, perhaps decades. And how do they propose we use this time? Asked Elder Kilan, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Admiral T-Vosh straightened, her mandibles clicking once before she spoke. They have offered to share a modified version of their Nexus combat system with Conclave forces, not the full neural interface that remains uniquely suited to human neurophysiology, but enough to significantly enhance our defensive capabilities. In exchange for what? Vextra asked suspiciously. The revocation of the ban on human warships in Conclave space, T-Vosh replied, and formal recognition of humanity's right to defend itself as it sees fit. The debate that followed was intense but brief. The reality of the situation was undeniable. Without human intervention, the Conclave would have fallen to the Void Heralds. Pride and ancient traditions had nearly doomed an entire civilization. 3 days later, the ban was officially lifted. Human warships were welcomed into Conclave space, not as potential threats, but as essential allies against a greater darkness. On the observation deck of the Eternal Harmony, now docked alongside the Thermopylae at Concordia Station, Admiral T-Vosh and Commander Mercer stood side by side, watching as human and Conclave engineers worked together to integrate compatible systems. You knew this would happen eventually, T-Vosh said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Jackson shrugged. We hoped it wouldn't take an existential threat to bring us together, but humans have a saying. Necessity is the mother of invention and cooperation. The Conclave feared your ships because they were too lethal, T-Vosh observed. Now we welcome them for the same reason. The universe is more dangerous than any of us imagined, Jackson replied. Perhaps now we can face those dangers together rather than fearing each other. As they spoke, beyond the edge of known space, the main fleet of the Void Heralds received the final transmissions from their advance force. New calculations were made, strategies adjusted. The light of civilization had proven more resilient than anticipated. But the Void remained patient. It had extinguished countless lights across the cosmos. This one would fall as well, in time. Unless, perhaps, the unlikely alliance of methodical tradition and ruthless innovation could forge something new, something stronger than either civilization alone could achieve. The war for survival had only just begun.